So for new and experienced users alike, shopping for computer parts has never been an easy process. It's always a very difficult decision choosing between price, performance, and quality. In this video series, I'm going to be helping you choose all of these, the best options that you can get. I'm going to be going through every individual computer part so that you can build your dream computer for the price that you want. My name is Riley. Cue that club music. So this video is going to be all about graphics cards, and more specifically, the price, integrated or dedicated, size, the power and connectors, speed, memory, bottlenecking, and where you should start looking for them. So first, we're going to go with price. I believe this is the first place that you should start with any computer part, because you can buy anything ranging from $100 to $3,000. So having a good place to start is very important. So if you want a graphics card that is $300, you know you're in that right range. So the first thing you should always do is set up a price point of what you want for your card. The second thing I believe you should be looking into is if you want integrated or dedicated graphics cards. Dedicated graphics cards are your standard graphics cards that you'll see. The big, hunky pieces of metal that you attach to your motherboard. Integrated, on the other hand, are actually soldered down to the motherboard itself. If you want to switch that out, you couldn't. It's in the motherboard. You can't take it out. So you kind of have to decide what you want there. In my honest opinion, and pretty much anybody's opinion, dedicated is always the way to go, unless you're doing something like a laptop, in which you almost always have to have an integrated graphics card. But if you have a desktop, you should always be going for dedicated, because it's bigger, you'll get more performance, and it's generally just gonna last longer. The next thing to look at is your size. Size is very, very important, and believe me, because I've made this mistake before. You can't have a really small computer case with a really big graphics card. You have to make sure that the dimensions will fit. I'm sure you're not going to find a graphics card that is physically actually larger than your computer case, but you have to make sure the insides that things don't conflict. And you can do that by either opening up your case and measuring things yourself and comparing that with the dimensions on your graphics card's dimensions page or properties page, whatever they're calling it nowadays. Or you can do that by, if you don't have the case yet, you can look up the dimensions online and it should be able to help you. This is very important because I've made this mistake before by having a case that was too small for a graphics card, which made me get a new case, which then made me get a new motherboard along with a new CPU, but we'll be getting into that later, so don't worry about that right now. The next thing you should be looking at for a graphics card is your power and the connectors needed to power the graphics card. This is also very, very important, because you can't have a power supply with very low power outage and then a graphics card that takes up a lot of power. If you're going to be going for a powerful card, you're almost going to need 750 watts. I also had to do this when I had my first computer. I had 500 watt power supply, got a graphics card, and I needed more. This is very important because power is kind of a tricky thing in computers. If your power supply is too small for all your parts, you could potentially ruin all your parts, and that is a bad day right there. So make sure that you're looking up for the card that you want the power needed. The second thing is to make sure you have the connectors needed. Graphics cards take various different power cables, I guess you want to call. Some have 8-pin connectors, some have 6-pin. I don't know. You just have to look that up and make sure that the power supply that you have is good. Almost all modern cards that are at least good are going to take 8-pin connectors, like mine has 2 for example, and modern power supplies should have that no problem, but it's still something you need to make sure of, because once again, I had that mistake. The next thing you need to be looking into is the speed. Now this is where things really do get kind of tricky, because it's not always easiest to find out about these kind of things. So what you need to look up when you're buying a graphics card is first off the clock speed, and this will be measured in megahertz. The higher you have, the better the card is generally going to be. So look for something with the highest megahertz. The second thing you need to look for is shader cores. Nvidia calls theirs CUDA cores. Higher, once again, is better. AMD calls theirs stream processors. Same thing, different name, higher is better. So make sure you're looking for that. More megahertz, more CUDA cores or stream processors is better. Keep that in mind. The next thing you need to look for is memory. Memory is something that I feel has kind of been a source of confusion, because I know I was confused. If you look on a lot of AMD cards, you'll see they'll have like 12 gigabytes of RAM, and you see that and you're like, oh my gosh, 12 gigabytes of RAM, that's amazing. I haven't ever seen a card with 12 gigabytes of RAM on it. That doesn't mean it's better. It does not mean it's better at all. A card with, let's say, 4 gigabytes of RAM may even be better than that 12 gigabytes of RAM because of the speed, the clock speed and megahertz, which we just talked about, and then the shader cores. So you need to make sure that you keep that in mind at all points when you're buying your card. You want to look for the most bandwidth in gigabytes per second. That's what you look for in memory. So more RAM doesn't necessarily mean it's better. And also you want to always make sure that you're getting GDDR5 over DDR3 RAM. Probably 1 gigabyte of GDDR5 RAM is going to be better than 4 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM. So always make sure you're trying to get that. Unless you're going for a lower end card, then it's okay. But if you actually want power for gaming or editing, something like that, you want to always go for that GDDR5 RAM. That's getting exhausting to say. So the next thing you need to make sure you're looking for is bottlenecking. You can buy the most powerful card in the world, put that into your computer, and still not be able to run Minecraft with more than 20 frames per second. That's because you need to make sure everything else in your computer is also powerful. You can't just have one component. When one component is powerful and it's held back by all your other components, that's what bottlenecking is. So you need to make sure at all points in your tower everything is good. You need to make sure you have the CPU, you need to make sure you have the RAM. Everything has to be updated and good if you want full performance out of your graphics card. If you're slowly upgrading your build, then you're probably going to get some bottlenecking. That's okay, but you're not going to get the full performance out of your card until you upgrade your other parts. So always keep that in mind. The last thing we're going to be talking about is where to start looking for a graphics card. This is extremely confusing. I know, because when I started building computers, I had no clue where to look. I saw larger numbers associated with one card and automatically thought that would be better than another card. No. Don't fall into that trap. That is not true. For Nvidia cards, you have to look at generations. For AMD too. But you have to be looking for generations. Okay? So 600, 700, 900, and 1000 series are where you're going to be looking for Nvidia cards. Now here's where things get a little bit tricky. There may be a card called a GeForce 970, but that GeForce 970 may not be stronger than a GeForce 780 Ti, for example. It's really tricky because even though a 970 has larger numbers in it, it's not more powerful, because you have to look at it as a generation. So each generation, you're going to have your 80 cards. You're going to have a 680, then the next generation is going to be a 780, and the next one, they skip the 800, it's going to be the 980. Those are going to be your most powerful cards for that generation. And they usually add a Ti to the end or something that just gives it a little bit more performance. So then under that most powerful card in that generation, you're going to have a 670, a 770, and a 970. So each generation that goes up, it's going to be about the same price point, and it's always going to be the second best in that generation. It's going to be a step above that previous. So let's say a 770 is going to be stronger and better than a 670, but that 770 may not be better than a 680. That's because it's following generations. And the same goes with a 660, a 670, so on and so forth. So that's something you always have to keep in mind, because you have to be mindful of that when you're buying. You may see a card and it says 970 and you think that's better than a 780, but it's not necessarily true. And that's really where you have to go back and look at your speed and the memory of the card to make sure that you're getting the best for your price. AMD cards, on the other hand, are a little bit different, and quite frankly, they're a little bit confusing. So I'm trying to make this tutorial where it's future proof, where I'm not telling you exactly what card to get, and since I never know what AMD is going to call their cards because I find it confusing, I'm just going to put up this little chart right here, and you can look at this chart to decide if the card that you're looking at is good. So if you know the Nvidia ones, if you know how their generations work, you can just compare it with the AMD and choose something accordingly. I'm not a professional on AMD, I've always been Nvidia, so yeah. So anyways, I hope you learned something from this video. If you did, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike and tell me in the comments why, and I will try to work on that for my next videos. Be on the lookout for my CPU videos, my power supply videos. I'm going to be going through everything to teach you how to build your very own computer. Thank you, and I'll talk to you to teach you how to build